At a super fancy wedding with rich and famous people, one guest was made fun of in front of everyone. But what started as a cruel joke turned into a big surprise that shocked the entire crowd. This is the story of Emily Thompson, a woman who showed everyone that being kind and true to yourself is more important than wealth and status. The Grand Royal Estate was everything you would imagine for a wedding fit for royalty. Perched high on the cliffs, it offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Mediterranean coast. The sparkling blue waves below contrasted beautifully with the golden hues of the estate's architecture, making it look like something out of a dream. The estate's marble floors and towering windows gave the space a sense of grandeur, but it was the atmosphere that truly took your breath away. Guests filed in, each one dressed to the nines, creating a sea of glittering jewels and flawless couture. It felt as though the entire room had been cast in gold. Dresses shimmered like liquid metal, diamonds sparkled in every corner, and men in sleek tuxedos looked like models out of a high-fashion magazine. The air was filled with the delicate scent of fresh flowers and the crisp, celebratory smell of champagne, mingling together in a luxurious dance. This wasn't just any wedding. This was the union of Charlotte Winters, the social media darling and fashion influencer who had captivated millions with her chic style, and Victor Shaw, a self-made businessman who had just sold his tech company for a jaw-dropping $300 million. The two of them were not only a power couple in every sense of the word, but they represented the pinnacle of success in the modern world. As the crowd gathered, it was clear this wasn't just an ordinary ceremony. The guest list read like a who's who of the ultra-wealthy, high-powered CEOs, famous social media stars, and even a few members of minor royalty. Every name on that list carried weight, and every conversation was filled with power, influence, and exclusivity. The event felt like something straight out of a fairy tale. Cameras clicked from every angle as the hashtag #CharlotteVictor began trending before the ceremony had even begun. It was the kind of wedding that would be talked about for years, an event designed not just to celebrate love, but to solidify their place at the top of society's most glamorous echelon. But amid all the opulence and glitz, it was impossible to ignore that this wedding wasn't just a celebration of two people. It was also a spectacle, a statement of wealth and status that would be remembered long after the vows were exchanged. As the grand doors of the Grand Royal Estate opened, Emily Thompson stepped into the wedding, walking alone but with a quiet grace. The contrast was striking. While the ballroom was alive with flashing lights and laughter, filled with guests dressed in the most exquisite designer gowns and tuxedos, Emily was a breath of fresh air in her simple, light green dress. It wasn't a dress that would catch your eye for its price tag or glamour, but there was something about the way it hung on her that made it look effortlessly beautiful. Her dress, unadorned and understated, fell just below her knees, and though it was plain, it had a soft elegance that stood out in its own way. Her brown hair, tied into a neat bun, was held together with a simple wooden pin, a small detail that gave her a grounded, natural air. She carried only a small gift wrapped in recycled paper, nothing flashy or over the top, just a humble token of goodwill. The paper was tied with twine, its simplicity almost a statement in itself. Emily didn't need grand displays of wealth to express her intentions. She wasn't here to impress anyone with what she wore or what she owned. She was here to celebrate, no more, no less. At 36, Emily's beauty wasn't the kind that demanded attention when she entered the room. It was the kind of beauty that grew on you, subtle and warm like the glow of the sun that you don't notice at first but soon can't imagine being without. Her brown eyes, calm and thoughtful, seemed to hold a quiet understanding of the world, a peace that was rare in a room full of noise and ostentation. There was no rush in her step, no flustered energy that so often accompanied those stepping into an event like this. Despite the chaos surrounding her, Emily moved with the kind of peace that made her feel as though she didn't belong to the rush of the world, but to something quieter, something deeper. Her presence, so simple yet so striking, was the kind that made you look twice, not because she was trying to be seen, but because you couldn't help but notice her calmness among the storm of extravagance. As Emily approached the guest check-in desk, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the stares already falling on her. The concierge, Lucia, gave her a quick once-over, her eyes briefly scanning the simple green dress that fell just above Emily's knees, the small recycled gift wrapped in twine that she carried, and the lack of any expensive jewelry or a designer handbag. Lucia's smile was polite, but there was something about it that felt cold, like it didn't quite reach her eyes. It wasn't mean, just distant, like Emily was an inconvenience. She could almost see the judgment behind Lucia's professional composure. "You need to use the side entrance," Lucia said firmly, her tone giving little room for negotiation. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't let the dismissal affect her. Instead, she smiled softly and took a small step closer, placing her invitation on the counter. "I'm here for Charlotte and Victor," she said calmly. "I was invited." The words hung in the air, almost too simple for the situation, but it was enough to make Lucia pause. Her brow furrowed slightly, her practiced smile faltering for a moment. She glanced down at the invitation, then back at Emily, seemingly surprised by the lack of hesitation in Emily's voice. Lucia quickly checked the invitation, flipping it over as if expecting to find some flaw or error. When nothing jumped out at her, she hesitated, then turned away, murmuring to someone in the back to double-check. Emily stood there quietly, her hand still gently holding the gift, as the sound of the party continued to swirl around her, unaware of the small, invisible battle playing out in this corner of the room. It was a brief moment, but for Emily, it felt like a reminder of how out of place she truly was among all the glitter and wealth. After what felt like an eternity of whispers and side glances, Charlotte, the bride, made her grand entrance into the lobby. Her presence was impossible to ignore. She was a vision of perfection, draped in a sparkling gown that shimmered with every step, and wearing a crown-like tiara that caught the light, making it look like she was a princess from a fairy tale. Her beauty and confidence filled the room, and the guests couldn't help but stare. But when Charlotte's eyes landed on Emily, standing quietly by the guest check-in, her expression faltered just for a moment. It wasn't that she didn't recognize Emily, it was that she immediately saw an opportunity to make her feel small, to remind her just how out of place she was among all the wealth and beauty in the room. Charlotte's smile, which had been poised and regal a moment before, twisted into something sharp, almost sneering. "Oh my God, you actually came," Charlotte said, her voice rising so everyone could hear. "Still living that, what do you call it, real life?" The words hung in the air, and Emily felt the sting of the mockery, though she didn't show it. Her heart raced for a split second, but she remained rooted in place. Charlotte's bridesmaids Clara, Olivia, and Nina burst into laughter, the sound shrill and cutting. Their phones were out in an instant, the cameras trained on Emily, capturing her like she was some kind of joke. Charlotte turned to the crowd, her smile as fake as the sparkle of her gown. "This is Emily Thompson, my old school friend," she said with exaggerated sweetness. "Still living that real-life fantasy," she mocked, her voice dripping with disdain. "What do you call it again?" "Thrift store cheek." Her words were met with another round of laughter from the group. The taunts felt sharp and deliberate, aimed at making Emily feel invisible, out of place, unworthy. As the laughter echoed through the room, Emily stood still, her expression calm but her heart pounding in her chest. Despite the hurt, she refused to let it show. She had been through worse than this. Her outfit, her simple gift wrapped in recycled paper, was not a mistake. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. She was here for a reason, to celebrate the couple, not to play the part of a society they didn't know or understand. The taunts stung, each word like a tiny dart aimed straight at Emily's heart. But she didn't flinch. Despite the laughter and the pointed stares, she remained composed. She knew what they were trying to do: break her, embarrass her, make her feel small in a room full of people who couldn't possibly understand her. But Emily wouldn't let them win. With a quiet strength, she lifted her chin slightly, her lips curving into a gentle, unwavering smile. "I came to celebrate your day, Charlotte," she said, her voice calm and steady, as though nothing had happened. "This gift is for you and Victor." Her words, simple and sincere, hung in the air, but they didn't seem to soften the tension. Charlotte's gaze flicked down to the gift, her eyes narrowing with a mix of disgust and disbelief. "A gift wrapped in recycled paper," Charlotte said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Really?" She didn't even bother to take the gift from Emily's hands. Instead, she turned away, dismissing her with a flick of her perfectly manicured hand. The crowd burst into loud laughter, mocking, cruel. They weren't just laughing at the gift. They were laughing at Emily, her choice to show up in simplicity, her refusal to conform to the world they lived in. The whispers began, quick, sharp murmurs that passed from guest to guest. Some stared openly, some pointed discreetly. A few voices rose in chorus, louder now, feeding on the moment. "Send her to the gift table to organize the trash," one guest shouted, a mean, ugly grin plastered on their face. The laughter grew, thick and cutting, echoing off the marble floors, and Emily could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. The air felt heavy with judgment, but she didn't let it break her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight back. Instead, she stood tall, head high, shoulders straight, her hand still holding the gift close to her chest like a shield. Her grip tightened ever so slightly, but it was the only sign of strain in her posture. A few security guards appeared then, tall and stern, their faces emotionless. They were there to do their job, to escort her out. They had no interest in what had just unfolded, but Emily didn't argue. There was no point in it. She hadn't come for a fight, she'd come to honor the couple, to offer something from the heart. So, she walked. Gracefully, purposefully, with the same calm presence she'd carried in since the moment she entered. The whispers followed her, but she didn't let them speed up her steps. Each one of them felt like it was trying to tear her apart, but she refused to let it. The crowd parted as she walked through, their eyes following her every move. But Emily held her head high, as if she were untouched by the cruel laughter that trailed her every step. Just as Emily was about to leave, feeling the weight of the crowd's harsh stares pressing down on her, something unexpected happened. The sound of sleek, purring engines broke through the buzz of whispers. A line of black Rolls-Royces pulled up outside, their glossy surfaces gleaming in the sun, their presence a striking contrast to the harshness of the moment. The crowd suddenly grew still, their eyes all turning toward the entrance. No one could have anticipated what happened next. Out of the lead car stepped Julian Foster, Emily's husband, the elusive billionaire whose name carried weight in every corner of the world. He was tall, with an air of quiet power that seemed to fill the space as soon as he entered the room. His suit, tailored to perfection, gave him a commanding presence, but it was the look in his gray eyes, calm, steady, and sharp, that left everyone in awe. The crowd, who had been busy whispering and pointing, suddenly fell silent. Julian moved through the crowd with ease, his gaze never leaving Emily. There was something in the way he walked, purposeful, confident, and unwavering, that made everyone in the room stop what they were doing. They watched as he reached Emily, and without hesitation he gently took her hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring, a quiet promise of solidarity in a world that had just tried to tear her down. "Are you okay?" Julian asked softly, his voice low but filled with concern. Emily's heart swelled at the sound of his voice. She smiled, the warmth of his words lifting the weight of the moment. "Always, Julian," she replied, her voice steady, though her emotions ran deeper than she could express in that moment. Turning to face the crowd, Julian raised his voice strong, clear, and filled with authority. There was no hesitation in his tone, no fear of what they might think. "Apologies for the interruption," he began, his words cutting through the silence. "I just want to introduce the most important woman in my life. This is my wife, Emily Foster." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. The shock in the crowd was palpable as the realization hit. Emily wasn't just anyone. She wasn't some outsider who had stumbled in uninvited. She was his wife, the one he had chosen to stand beside, the one who shared his life and his world. In that moment, Emily felt the heavy weight of their earlier judgment begin to lift. She wasn't just a guest. She was part of something far bigger, and the crowd was finally starting to see it. The room fell silent, the weight of Julian's words hanging in the air. The crowd, once so full of mockery and laughter, now stared in stunned disbelief. Their eyes flicked from Julian to Emily, as if trying to make sense of what they had just heard. The shift was palpable. Charlotte, the bride, stood frozen, her mouth agape in shock. She had no words. The smugness that had been plastered on her face only moments before was gone, replaced by a look of disbelief. She had assumed Emily was just another guest, someone out of place, someone to be dismissed. But now, as Julian's revelation echoed through the room, the truth about Emily was impossible to ignore. Julian's voice cut through the silence again, steady and clear. "Emily isn't just any guest here," he said, his gaze never leaving her. "She's the heart and soul behind Foster Enterprises, the company I built. She's been the one helping countless businesses grow, investing in startups, and turning ideas into reality. But she's also done so much more than that. She's funded charities, rebuilt communities, and made a real difference in the world, all without ever seeking the spotlight." The words felt like a sharp contrast to the mocking whispers that had surrounded Emily just moments before. As Julian spoke, the truth of Emily's quiet strength, her commitment to giving and building, began to sink into the minds of the guests. They realized just how wrong they had been. Emily wasn't just someone who didn't fit in at this extravagant wedding. She was a pillar of influence, someone whose contributions had shaped industries and lives in ways they couldn't even begin to comprehend. As the truth spread like wildfire through the crowd, Charlotte's carefully constructed world of fake glamour and shallow status began to crumble. The cracks that had been hidden behind the designer gowns, flashy tiaras, and curated Instagram photos now stood exposed. It was all built on a lie, on the false belief that wealth and status could define a person's worth. And now, in front of everyone, the reality was clear. Emily wasn't the outcast or imposter they had tried to make her out to be. She was the one who mattered. As the weight of Julian's revelation settled over the room, another figure stepped forward, Victor Shaw, the groom. His face was a mix of shock, regret, and something deeper, guilt. The confident businessman who had been the center of attention just moments ago now looked vulnerable, his emotions raw and unfiltered. The crowd fell into an uneasy silence as his gaze shifted to Emily, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions. "Emily," he began, his voice cracking with the weight of the truth. "You helped me when no one else believed in me. You were the reason I'm here today. I wouldn't have made it this far without you." His words hung heavy in the air, and a hushed murmur rippled through the crowd. He groomed this successful, admired man was giving credit to Emily, not to Charlotte, not to anyone else in the room, but to the very woman who had been humiliated just moments ago. Victor paused, his eyes turning toward Charlotte, the woman he had planned to marry. There was no hesitation now. His voice, though shaken, grew stronger as he spoke. "I can't marry someone who treated Emily this way," he said, his words firm, as if he had finally found the courage to speak the truth. "This wedding ends right now." For a moment, it felt like the entire room held its breath. Charlotte stood there, stunned, her mouth moving without sound as she tried to process what was happening. The laughter that had once filled the air now felt hollow, like a distant echo in the wake of Victor's words. The truth had shattered the illusion. The groom, the man she thought she could control, had turned against her, and it was all for Emily. As the weight of his words settled into the crowd's collective consciousness, the room fell into an unexpected silence. And then, like a wave breaking after a storm, the applause began. It was slow at first, hesitant, as if the guests weren't sure if they should join in. But soon the applause grew, louder and more confident, as people realized the significance of what had just happened. They weren't applauding the wedding anymore. They were applauding the moment of truth, the courage, and the justice that had finally been served. The crowd was stunned, but as the realization sank in, they couldn't help but acknowledge what had just occurred. The truth had come to light, and Emily, the quiet, humble woman they had all overlooked, was the true hero of the story. In the wake of Victor's revelation, the room was a mixture of stunned silence and whispered conversation. But amid the chaos, Julian and Emily shared a quiet moment. Their eyes met, and there was an unspoken understanding between them, a sense of peace that only comes from knowing you've done the right thing. In that brief, still moment, the noise of the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of calm amidst the storm. For Emily, it was a moment of reflection. She hadn't come here looking for praise or validation. She had simply wanted to be there for her friends. But now, in the midst of the chaos, she understood something deeper. Her strength and grace had been the real power all along. She hadn't bowed to the judgment of the crowd or the cruel taunts thrown her way. She had stayed true to herself, and in doing so, she had shown the world what real strength looked like. As the crowd began to process what had happened, the truth slowly dawned on them. The guests who had once mocked her, who had laughed at her outfit and her humble gift, now saw her through a new lens. Emily wasn't some outsider who didn't belong. She was the woman who had quietly shaped the world in ways they couldn't even imagine. Charlotte's world, on the other hand, began to crumble. Her carefully constructed image, the one built on wealth, status, and the superficialities of high society, fell apart in an instant. The crowd who had once adored her, who had envied her life and her wedding, now saw her for what she truly was. Her cruel actions, her attempts to belittle and humiliate Emily, had been exposed for all to see. The reality of who Charlotte was, someone who thrived on putting others down to lift herself up, became undeniable. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their admiration for Charlotte fading as they began to understand the depth of what had just unfolded. The applause for Emily had shifted the room's energy. The people who had once laughed at her were now beginning to see her for the amazing, powerful woman she truly was. She hadn't needed to fight back, to throw insults or drama into the mix. Emily's triumph came from staying calm, from holding her head high, and from being herself, and that was more than enough. As the applause grew, it was no longer just for Emily's strength, but for the truth and for the realization that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who carries the most power. In the end, this wedding wasn't remembered for its extravagant wealth, its opulent decor, or the list of VIP guests who filled the ballroom. It wasn't remembered for the glittering gowns or the carefully curated perfection that surrounded it. No, what this wedding would be remembered for wasn't its grand ceremony. It was the powerful, quiet strength of one woman who refused to be broken. Emily had been the real star of the day, not because she sought attention, but because she stood tall in the face of mockery, in the face of ridicule, and in the face of humiliation. She didn't have to fight back with words or anger. She simply stayed true to herself, to the values she held dear. And in doing so, she showed everyone what true strength looked like, not the loud, flashy kind that demands attention, but the kind that comes from within, the kind that endures and stands firm, no matter the odds. Julian, standing proudly by her side, summed it up perfectly. His words rang clear and true, cutting through the noise of the room, reaching every single person in the crowd. Emily values what matters. She's my partner, my equal, and the heart of everything I've built. It was a simple truth, but it carried more weight than all the wealth in the room. Emily wasn't here for the glitter or the glamour. She was here for what truly mattered, the people she loved, the causes she believed in, and the life she had built with Julian by her side. And as the final applause echoed through the ballroom, it wasn't just for Emily's grace or her quiet strength. It was for the reminder that sometimes the most important victories aren't the loudest or most celebrated, but the ones that come from staying true to yourself, even when the world tries to make you feel small.